Welcome to St Mary's Church for this special service, which has been organised by Northumberland County Council and Emily Inspires. And it's to recall the day 100 years ago when the first women were able to vote in this country. And also in the year when we've remembered the end of the First World War, to consider the role of women during that great war.
2018 has been a particularly poignant year and a cause for much celebration. Looking back, in February we celebrated the centenary of the Representation of People Act 1918, which enabled the first women to gain the right to vote. It overwhelms me today, in fact it gives me goosebumps, to think that the first women voted on this very day 100 years ago, December the 14th, 1918. In March we gathered in Prudhoe to mark International Women's Day and to celebrate the social, economic, cultural and political achievements of women across the world. And we heard some really fascinating stories about inspirational women from many of you, some of whom are sat here again with us today. In April we recognised RAF 100 years since the formation of the RAF, and the WRAF, recognising that women played an integral part in the RAF and today continue to do so. In September, we unveiled the Emily Wilding Davison sculpture in Carlisle Park as a lasting tribute to Morpeth's most famous campaigner and hero of the women's suffrage movement, and of course one of those responsible for securing the right to vote for women. And we will hear more about Emily later. Then in November, many of us gathered in our communities to mark the centennial of the armistice to end World War I. And we remember not only those who made the ultimate sacrifice for their country, but also those women who worked tirelessly at home with the war effort, whilst many of the working age men were fighting overseas. Finally this month, we mark the 100th anniversary of the Parliament Qualification of Women Act, which for the first time allowed women to stand as candidates and be elected as MPs. In December 1918, the first woman, Constance Markievicz, was elected to the House of Commons, but unfortunately at that time, as an Irish Republican, she did not take her seat. And it wasn't until 1919 that Viscountess Nancy Astor became the first woman to enter the House and sit as a Member of Parliament. Now, before the First World War, it tended to be only unmarried women who would work, with the vast majority employed as domestic servants. The role of women changed dramatically during the war, with an estimated 2 million replacing men in the workforce between 1914 and 1918. Many volunteered as nurses and teachers. Many worked in munition factories, and many worked the land. And the work of these women did was long, tiring and exhausting, as well as dangerous and hazardous to their health. Emmeline Pankhurst, leader of the British suffragette movement at the time, focused her efforts on helping the war effort and encouraged other suffragettes to do the same. She pointed out quite rightly that there was no point in continuing to fight for the vote when there might be no country in which they could vote. And during the course of that war, women proved themselves to be every bit as equal as men, and the government promised in theory to give women the vote when the war was finished. And finally today I want to share with you the story of Lady Sybil Grey, who lived at Howick Hall in Northumberland and was a member of the famous Earl Grey tea family. During the First World War, Lady Sybil ran one of the first Red Cross hospitals in the northeast to cope with the steady stream of wounded soldiers coming back from the trenches. She and her family transferred her home at Howick Hall, and she began her own nursing career, treating some of the 400 patients that passed through the hospital over the course of the Great War. But not content with that, she travelled across war-torn Europe, to help set up and run the Anglo-Russian hospital in St. Petersburg. And during her time in Russia, she met the country's royal family, and she survived the revolution of 1917. Lady Sybil was fatally injured in a freak accident when a fragment from a hand grenade hit her during a visit to a field hospital. Sybil returned to Britain to recover to Northumberland, but undeterred in 1919, she spent nearly a year in France leading the Women's Legion, which supplied ambulance drivers to the British Army. It's almost impossible now to know what motivated Sybil, but it is likely that she felt a personal connection to the First World War. Her cousin Sir Edward Grey was the Foreign Secretary, and her brother Charlie was serving at Flanders. But whatever her cause, her work is a remarkable testament to the strength of patriotic feeling across all classes of society during the war, and more importantly, the potential of one woman to make a real difference.
A woman. Certainly Emily Wilding Davison, had she been alive, would have thought that a new dawn had indeed broken, as 100 years ago today, women voted for the first time. I gather the voting was brisk in Newcastle because telegrams were sent reporting, and many women voted. It was, of course, only women over 30 who met the property qualification who were given the vote. The very description of being given the vote sounds more as if it was gift-wrapped present, particularly at this time of year, rather than a right. Yes, it was a step forward to enable almost 2/3 of women to have a voice, a say in those who represented them. But it seems it was not only the catalyst of the woman's role that had been played, as we heard, so bravely during the war, which had made some realise that they could amazingly do more than bear children and be homemakers, but also that there was a law disenfranchising men who had been out of the country for over 12 months, which meant the vast numbers of the returning army would not have been eligible to vote. So the law had to be changed, and I think that women gained the right on the coattails of this, rather than in any other way. Even serving their country from factory to Western Front did not seem to convince some men that women should be allowed to vote. Emily Wilding Davison, I am sorry. I should have continued to carry your banner, and the banner that you and your brave sisters held, instead of thinking, job done. It is not. November 1918 was a start, but I hand the baton to you. March on. There is much to be done.